This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
The moment a body is found, the clock starts ticking. 48 hours before the trail goes cold. From A&E and Crime House, this is the official podcast from the famous true crime series, The First 48. I'm Carter Roy. Every Thursday, I revisit a landmark homicide investigation in depth with long-form storytelling built for your ears. Listen to and follow The First 48 on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we limp slowly and painfully to the end of the Lindsay Clancy trial. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my red-hot co-host, Alice.
Red hot, steaming mad, or maybe just a little bit of a Rascal Flatts fan.
I mean,
there are just so many jokes to be made about today. Don't have too much fun.
I'm getting a little tired of Reddington shtick. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it was fun for a while.
Seeing it back to back with all these witnesses with no variation, in the sense that he's treating them all with the same playbook right now. It got me mad. I had to turn it off at one point today.
Look, I thought, whatever you think about this case, whatever you think about Reddington, today he was completely ineffectual. It was a mistake how he approached this witness. He had a lot of missed opportunities. I said on X, this was the first time that I was irritated at him on behalf of Lindsay Clancy, because he could have done so much more for her case with this expert. We talked about this yesterday. I mean, here's the thing about this case. And, this episode's long anyways, so I'll try and keep this short. But here's the thing about this case. Those jurors, and there are people who feel strongly one way or the other. That's absolutely true. But I think the vast majority of people, and probably the vast majority of the jurors, are really in this middle. And their views are sort of shifting back and forth as the case goes, as they're hearing things. It's close for them. Well, guess what? That's a good place to be if you're the defense, because the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. And you have this expert who, yes, his conclusions are bad for Lindsay Clancy, because his conclusions are that she's guilty. But even he acknowledges how close it was and how hard it was to reach those conclusions and how thoughtful he had to be. And there is such a good argument there that Reddington could have used for reasonable doubt. Respect your opinion. Understand why you think that. But this was tough for you too, wasn't it? It was really hard for you to get there, wasn't it? And you're a doctor with 30-something years experience. I mean, there were so many opportunities there to take that approach. And instead, we just got typical standard Reddington defense attorney cross-examination theatrics. And I just think it was a complete missed opportunity.
He really needed to come in. He could have dealt with all of this with a scalpel, because all he had to do was excise one little bit. Essentially, the ultimate conclusion. All the things leading up to it, for him. He said there was a mental defect. He said that at the end of the day, remember his words, because it stood out to me in the direct when she said, she asked the ultimate question, did she know the wrongfulness of her conduct? And he said, I have to be very careful about this. Why do you have to be careful, good doctor? Is it perhaps because It was so close to the line. This is me being Reddington, what he should have done. Is it because you're so close to the line that maybe one additional fact that you don't know could push you over to the fact that no, she is not criminally liable? I think he would have said yes. I truly do, because if you heard him, he spoke in a very careful, kind of tortured manner, because he was right on that line. So Reddington today needed to come in with precision like a surgeon with a scalpel. All he had to do was get Heilbrun, and he kept calling him in the third person.
So
very
weird.
Bizarre. Kept calling him Dr. Heilbrun to him as opposed to saying you. All he needed to do was lead him up to the conclusion and then say, that was a close one. So this jury actually is the one who makes this decision, not you. You've given us all the pieces of the equation. Thank you, doctor. Thank you for the painstaking 180 hours you spent on this trying to get truth. Thank you for giving the ladies and gentlemen of this jury all the puzzle pieces they need in order to reach the ultimate truth in this case. And there. Instead, he came in and just started blasting rockets and cannonballs every which way. Didn't know where they were. They were misfiring. They were going backwards, and they were so loud he couldn't even hear them. And Rascal Flatts was blaring in the background. And I'm making a joke about Rascal Flatts only because these sorts of missteps, like the Rascal Flatts, we're all laughing and talking about it right now. I'm not minimizing that. It detracts from all the good this doctor would have done for Reddington's case. All we remember are baseless questions and missteps.
And look, I think we should just call it like it is. Reddington has started paying attention to TikTok, Twitter, YouTubers. He has started paying attention to that. You can tell by some of the questions he's asking and the way he's asking them. And I think it has actually had an effect on him. I think if this weren't televised, if it weren't such a big case, he would have handled this witness very differently. You know, you mentioned that where the doctor is literally talking about how difficult it was and how careful he was in his conclusion. And not only did Reddington not use it, he objected. He objected to him describing it that way. And I'm like, what are you doing? But he did it throughout. And we'll dive in and talk about this whole thing. So remember, this ended yesterday with Dr. Kirk, as we like to call him, the whole, mortal sin thing. So that ended the day. So we come back and we just go right back into it. We skip the whole mortal sin part. We start with something called peritraumatic disassociation. And this is when something traumatic happens to you, you can feel like you're watching yourself. And people can remember it as an out-of-body experience when something traumatic happens to you. And this is actually fairly common, happens a lot. She is described at times watching herself do this, and that has been presented by the defense as evidence of psychosis. Dr. Kirk says, no, any traumatic event can make you do that, whether you have mental illness or psychosis or anything. It's not necessarily or even really a symptom of psychosis. It's a symptom of a traumatic experience. Whatever you think was behind her doing this, still traumatic. Killing your children is a traumatic thing, and she obviously was involved in that. She said when she was describing this to him that, she was fully under control. There was no decision making involved. Prosecution did a really good point here of pointing out that is simply not true. The voice tells her to kill her children so she can kill herself. But that's all it says. And in fact, she tells us that the voice says that over and over and over and over again. But it doesn't tell her all the other things she has to do. And there were a lot of decisions to be made. Why the basement? Which child goes first? What do you say to the children to keep them calm? Where do you do it in the basement? Remember, she didn't kill the kids all just in one room. What do you use to do this? Who's the middle? Who's the last? And then when she does decide to take her own life, what ways to do it? Where to do it? And in fact, she had 3 different decisions to make on the method of suicide. So I thought that was interesting. And he basically said, when you look at all this stuff, you have these 2 real choices for how this went. This is either a truly psychotic event where she is, for lack of a better term, out of her mind, and she did this horrible thing, or it is something a little bit more ordinary and unfortunately a little bit more common that we see, which is suicide, a serious suicide attempt, accompanied by this altruistic filicide. I'm going to take my kids with me because they'll be better off with me than if I left them behind. And he says the evidence for the second is much stronger. at this point, there's sort of a weird thing that happens, and I don't know if the prosecution was trying to imply there was some sort of conversation with Lindsay by some outside person between the first 2 days and the third day. Remember, he's with her 3 days. He's there 2 days for the interview, first and third day, and then in the middle he does psychiatric testing. And he's asked, were there differences between how she was the first and second day and the last day? And he said the first 2 days she had incredibly good recollection. She was attuned to the questions. She had memory for things as small as dates, when she was prescribed things, what she was prescribed, what the dosage was, even though it's been 3 years. By the third day, it was much more, I don't remember, I don't recall. She couldn't remember little things like what arm she wore her Apple Watch on. And he asked her about her initial statement at Brigham and Women's, which she wrote down, that she felt horrified. And she said she didn't remember writing that and didn't remember why she would have written that. Then we go to something we've talked about, the differences in the statements, and about how what they said is problematic and that she has told different people different things. And this is going to be fleshed out even more as we go on. He also noted it was very unusual to have the crime interrupted by a phone call. Just a very strange thing, and something that it's helpful because it helps you give a timing of the events, but also difficult to fit into a truly psychotic event. Notes that she was future-oriented at Brigham. But he also says, look, when I say that, and this is why he could have been used. He says, when I say that, I'm not saying she's over this or that she's thinking only about herself. She is still grieving. She is still in mourning. She told me she lost everything and she doesn't want to be here. This is not a self-centered person. This is not someone who's only focusing on themselves. And this was just yet another opportunity. There were so many places that if Reddington had just been taking his notes and gone back through this, essentially take all the good things he says in that direct and put them all together and make him your witness for a while. Don't argue about silly, stupid stuff or ask him where he stayed. Get on the things that matter. He could have done that, and I think really made some hay, not only with the jury, but with a lot of people. And it was just such a missed opportunity. And it really bothered me because I just think everyone involved in this case, and we've said this about the prosecution, we've complained about the prosecution because everyone involved in this case deserves the best possible representation to reach truth here. And we didn't get that.
And, you know, the thing, we said this about this doctor yesterday as well. Of every single medical professional who's testified, including Zeisel, who really liked and cared about Lindsay Clancy, I felt like Dr. Heilbrun really showed a care and empathy for Lindsay that I hadn't seen any other expert. And he truly saw the suffering in which she was. Like, there were questions that he answered, including in the cross where he said, she was a very good mother. It wasn't qualified. It wasn't, she kind of was sad. No, everything he said in terms of being able to help the defense's case was actually absolute and unqualified. She was a very good mother. It was a very serious suicide attempt. She was incredibly low in December. She had never been that low before. It seemed like nothing was ever going to get better for her. There were not shades of that. It was not gray. He was kind of black and white in terms of the suffering that Lindsay was undergoing. More so, I thought that even the defense's own experts. So I was very confused when Reddington didn't seize upon that and really milk it for all it's worth.
Look, if he just reaches the other conclusion, if he just looks at all that and says, and yes, I don't think she's culpable, you could have had the exact same testimony with him as a defense witness, and you'd have been fine with it. And that's what's so wild about Reddington's absolute failure to take advantage. And look, you know, you never know. It might work. I mean, maybe the jury's going to go back there and be like, man, all those prosecution witnesses were idiots. I mean, just look what the defense did to him. And if that happens, you know, more power to him. But I just feel like in a case this close, this difficult, this emotional, that the jury is looking for something a little bit more sophisticated than that.
And then, of course, I thought Dr. Heilbrun really stood out because he really was driven by this why. You know, he thinks she's a good mother. He thinks that she truly loves being a mother, in fact. And how then can one day she wake up and decide to end it all? So she had obviously been struggling with difficult months leading up to this, but why did she now want to take her life? Her whole life, he said, Lindsay had been someone who wanted to do well. She wanted to control things, and he didn't say that in a negative way. He said that she was able to control things and that she could control and self-discipline herself. She could run, she could exercise, she could work hard so that she could accomplish things. And it had worked up until that point. Her efforts to deal with her problems this time around, though, didn't work in the way that it had always worked before. She couldn't control her mental health, and it just wasn't something that you could solve through hard work, which would probably hit someone a little bit harder who was always able to use their own hard work and ingenuity to get themselves to accomplish something. So again, that control for him wasn't a negative. It was an explainer as to why someone like her, who didn't seem to have any risk factors before, would be in the position she is now. He said that she was suffering from a mental disease or defect, the first part of the McCool standard. She had bipolar 2 and depression along with insomnia, and depression obviously made kind of the bipolar worse. She did, however, appreciate the criminality of her actions. So that's the second part that you have to show in order to qualify for the insanity defense. He said this. He was like very careful. He said, I was very careful in my report at this point. He didn't just answer with a yes or no, even on direct when he's talking to the prosecution. He says, after I reviewed everything, looking at the decisions she had to make and the thinking that she expressed to me, she did appreciate the criminality of her actions. Her moral awareness was influenced by her strong desire to die. So what was driving this wasn't some sort of hatred for her kids or not wanting to be a mother. What was driving this was her wanting to end her own life and not leave her kids behind. Now, this serious suicide attempt along with altruistic filicide is what he thought this episode embodied. It was influenced by her depression and her desire to end her life, but she did retain control over whether, when, and how she carried it out, and the inclusion of her children in this suicide murder plan. And because of this, she was criminally responsible. For what it's worth, I don't think I've heard another expert describe it quite in that way, the driving force being the suicide. Honestly, I begin to understand how a mother who is very, very attuned to her children, seemingly loves her children very much, how she could do this, the way he described it, and again, because he said he wanted to know why, made sense to me.
And I don't want to spend yet another episode hammering the prosecution, but why this wasn't the story they told from the beginning, I don't know. Because everyone wants to know why, and he's the first person who told us. He tells us exactly what happened. And I understand, I get it, that there's a risk that someone might hear that and think, well, I think if she did that, she's not able to conform her actions, or she's obviously not thinking with moral clarity or whatever. That's a danger. That's a legitimate danger. But I also think it's the truth. I think he's absolutely right. One of these two things happened. It's not Patrick. She's not a psychopath. She either was under the grip of some sort of psychosis, or this is what happened. That's all there is to it. And I think the prosecution should be trying to convince people it's the latter, and the defense should be trying to convince people it's the former. But there should have been no mystery about this. You know, it shouldn't have taken us to day 20 to get someone to explain this in such a intelligent, incredible way. But that's where we were at. I still think it would have been funny if Reddington had just said, we're not going to call any witnesses. Like, what would the prosecution have done at that point? I mean, they would have asked to reopen? I don't know. Like, you can't do that. So, anyways. Okay, so now we get to the cross, and this is where everything goes wrong. I was very hopeful that we would see, as I said, a very effective cross. Instead, Reddington absolutely starts off at an 11. He begins asking about these contradictory statements, which makes sense because this is a problem for Lindsay. But the way he does it, instead of trying to harmonize them somehow, which I think you probably could try and do and might even be able to accomplish, he almost makes it seem like that the kill your children and kill yourself statement is somehow made up. It was like a creation of Dr. Kirk and Dr. Mack. This is not really what she said. The problem with this might work for the jury. He never comes out and says it directly. That seemed to be what I thought he was implying. For all of us watching, we know that in her civil complaint, she literally has that in her civil complaint, that is what the voice said. So he's not lying about that. She absolutely said that. And you've got other people, defense witnesses, by the way, who said that she talked about protecting her children. The voice was saying that her children would be harmed if she didn't go, which is just not consistent with what she said in her civil complaint and what she told Dr. Mack and Dr. Heilbrun. So then, as Alice mentioned, he not only does the whole yes or no trick where he asks a question that's clearly flawed and then demands a yes or no answer, but he also starts referring to him in the third person. So he says things like, what would Dr. Heilbrun say about this? And it's such a weird thing. And you can see the doctor's like,
he hasn't done that with any other witness, right?
I know, it was weird.
I thought he got confused who he was talking to, but he did it so many times, and he was clearly addressing Dr. Heilbrun that I was like, are we experiencing like a little bit of an aneurysm?
It
like,
was
what's
very
happening?
strange. And
Yeah.
I guess to the extent it was effective, like in the first 5 minutes of Cross, Kirk seemed, he and I are close friends now, so I'm just going to call him Kirk. Dr. Kirk Heilbrun, I just prefer to say Dr. Kirk because his last name, was like looking at him like, are you asking me a question? And it was awkward and weird for the first 5 minutes. Reddington would say something weird, and the doctor would just kind of sit there for a second and then be like, I don't think that's exactly what I said. And of course, the judge jumped in helpfully for Reddington a few times and admonished him, which is totally appropriate for a judge to do. So then we go through, it took 3 years to see her again, which we all know why. I mean, at this point, that's been testified to, so I don't know why we're still dealing with that. Now, a good reason that he does get out eventually is that it is the sooner the better. It would be better to see her immediately, of course. You know, it is somewhat of a limitation for him. He asks how much money he made. Every time he says, I don't even normally ask this question. BS, you don't normally ask that question. You ask it in every trial of every expert witness, whether the government asks it of your witnesses or not. And I'll just tell you, this may sound like a lot to you guys. $300 an hour and nothing. That's nothing. He
just
got
paid an
ripped
expert
off.
$750 an hour.
Yeah, he got totally ripped off. I don't know why they only, I guess it's the state or Commonwealth fee.
That might be what it is, but his credentials, he could easily be double that.
I mean, $54,000 sounds like a lot, but he's been working on this for a really long time. He's put 180 hours into it. That's just not a lot for an expert. He could have made a lot more than that. So now the jury doesn't know that, and so they may think, wow, what a hired gun this guy is, right? But just in reality, it's just not that much for an expert. So then we go through whether his experience with postpartum women, he's going to do the thing again, by the way, where he goes through every single one of his credentials, which is, I just don't understand why he does that. Back in 1982, he worked at the Florida State Hospital with a group of women who had killed their children. That's his main experience in this area. He's a generalist otherwise. So, you know, doesn't really matter, but it's an effective cross because you can say, oh, see, you don't even know about women like Lindsay, so how can you make the final judgment, even though he's obviously an expert on the mental diseases and defects that we're talking about. Then we have to talk about Park Dietz again, which I guess, look, the chances that anyone on that jury knows who Park Dietz is.
What is the controversy with them? I don't even know.
He's kind of like Warner Spitz or whatever. Like, he's seen as kind of a hired gun guy. He's testified in a ton of cases. I think he testified in the Dahmer case.
And that's the guy who owns Park Dietz?
Yes.
Okay.
But
I didn't even know that.
He testified in the first Andrea Yates trial. And there was this moment where, this is how I understand it, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a moment where he suggested that Andrea Yates got the idea for how to kill her children from a Law and Order episode. But it turned out that the Law and Order episode he was thinking of actually came out after the murders. And that was one of the reasons that her first conviction was overturned. And then her second time around, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. I think that's why he's bringing it up. The chance that anyone on that jury knows that, or knows who he is, or knows anything about him, I would say is pretty slim. But he keeps bringing it up, and maybe there will be somebody. And if there is, I guess they can explain it to the rest of the jurors and say, well, I know who that guy is, and he did all this bad stuff. So, anyways.
Thanks for explaining it to me, because I didn't know what the controversy was.
Yeah. So, he knows Dr. Mack, unsurprisingly. He has never met him before this. He met him in the lobby of the hospital. We have to go through, once again, where he stayed. He asked him if he stayed in a van down by the river. And the doctor's like, I stayed at a hotel. And once again, I don't know where this comes from. My only assumption, I truly believe there is some TikTok conspiracy about this, that either the two of them spent like a ton of money and stayed at like the Ritz-Carlton, or that Dr. Mack was staying with his secret girlfriend in Massachusetts, or something like that. There has to be something like that going on, because otherwise it's just absurd. It's just an absurd series of questions that doesn't make any sense. He wants to know how much time he spent with her. He spent 4.5 hours with her on day 1. He administered psychological testing for 3 hours. And then on day 3, 3 hours as well. So he spent 10.5 hours with her over 3 days, which is nowhere near as much time as Dr. Zazel, which was weird, but is a lot of time for someone in his position. And Reddington says, you spent all that time there trying to prove that the Commonwealth's right. He said, no, that was not my job. I was not there to prove anything. I was there to perform an assessment.
So then, and we're not going to do it justice, but truly the substance of what Reddington was trying to ask could have been really good, but the way he asked it had nothing to do with the answers. It very much was kind of like how he ended with Dr. Kirk with the I don't care, right? He didn't ask questions that he really wanted answers to. He asked a question in order to say things like, doctor, I don't want you to go off and lecture me. Just yes or no, repeatedly. Kind of did that shtick again today. What was more frustrating to me today was that the judge really let him have free reign. As the cross went on, Reddington got more egregious, which I think hurt Lindsay's case because the judge didn't come in.
That's such a good point. It is not just when a judge doesn't rein in a defense attorney, that does not necessarily mean he is helping the defense, because you're absolutely right on this.
Yeah, the judge, truly let him go, but it became more unwieldy. Honestly, as I was watching it, it was like when you have a hose on and then you let go of it, but it's on full blast. It just starts going crazy. It started out, okay, so no one's holding the hose. All right, spraying. And then when the judge didn't step in, and in fact, kind of whenever he came in, he would do so in a way where you thought maybe he was on the defense team, like not allowing the witness to answer the question. For example, it was like the nozzle was turned all the way up and the hose was just going crazy and spraying in all different directions, meaning everyone gets wet. In other words, the defense is not scoring the points that they need to. And so he really should have just wrapped himself in this particular diagnosis that the prosecution's expert made. Dr. Heilbrun said, my diagnosis is bipolar 2. Reddington honestly didn't even stop to acknowledge that meant she had a mental defect. He blew right past it and started fighting him on it and was like, do you think she's controlling? And the way he phrases all these questions are meant to be combative and not meant for a real answer. And of course, because Dr. Heilbrun is a careful psychologist, he does not automatically agree with everything that's said because he never said she was controlling. What Reddington's questions are coming from are honestly attacking the narrative that the prosecution has been saying. So the prosecution, the Commonwealth, has said in their presentation of the case and in their opening statement, she's a controlling mother. But that is never what Dr. Heilbrun said. So they're kind of grafting on their anger at the prosecution's theory of the case on Dr. Heilbrun, who has actually not said that about her, that she is a person who's able to control herself. That's not a negative in his mind. If anything, it shows self-discipline, right? And so, again, it's just like hit after hit. It felt like someone who was just punching a bag, the bag being Heilbrun, except he did hold up very well. We'll find out later that he teaches courses or teaches others on how best to withstand cross-examination. And what a good answer he said. You can see why he teaches the class. Reddington said something like, so you teach people how to sit through cross-examination, huh? And he's like, no, I help people be able to convey their opinions accurately while on the stand. I was like, expert way of saying it. And that's true, because the purpose of a cross-examination is to poke holes or to make it, to twist around your opinion, right? So then Reddington, the expert doesn't know this, but Reddington kind of brings in those notes to the babysitter. Remember, the prosecution made a big deal that she wrote notes about like what time the bottles were had for Callan and how to dice up the vegetables, those sorts of things. Reddington's like, you don't think this is control. You don't think this is weird. You don't think that this shows that you're like a crazy mother, right? And he's like, no, there's nothing unusual about it. Okay, I don't know that that's a great point to score with him. And honestly, that's fine. I think it's a very minor point over here. Now, he says that he did not review her 5-star reviews at the hospital. And this, honestly, was the best point. But it would have gotten missed if you were just listening to tone. Because Reddington is still just punching Dr. Heilbrun nonstop. As he gets her to say, without any prompting really, he thinks Lindsay's a good mother. Unqualified statement. She's a good mother. A very good mother. And then in the midst of this, which is a fantastic admission by the other side's expert, before he can even dwell on it and say, I too agree that she is an excellent mother, He throws in, is like, do you even know who Rascal Flatts is? Dr. Heilbrun, who's like 70 years old, like he himself has said he's not very young. He's like, no, I really don't. Which was a laugh out loud moment, and it did not land because like what he was trying to get across was that Lindsay sang, I guess, a Rascal Flatts song to Cora at night before bed. But throwing away that, do you even know who Rascal Flatts is? And having the doctor really not know who Rascal Flatts is, which is just a country band, was a detraction from an otherwise fantastic testimony for the defense. So for what it's worth, I've heard of Rascal Flatts, but it was just so perfect that he hadn't. And he also went on the fact, like, Lindsay made a snowman that morning. And there are no risk factors for her. You said it yourself. Well, I'm sorry, I'm saying it way nicer than Reddington did. Reddington is saying this all in an attack manner. He says, she was raised by a loving mother and father, right? And he's like, this is a random killing then. There's no reason she would kill anyone. Dr. Kirk says it's not random. And he's like, this isn't random. This was the altruistic filicide. And so I will say Reddington never got under Heilbrun's skin. Then he mentions how he interviewed Pat, Lindsay's husband. And Pat was the one who said that she had difficulty leaving the kids. And that, in fact, on their date night for their 5th anniversary, she was anxious to leave the kids. Now, Reddington is so weird and acts like this didn't happen. This is not a bad thing. I think it's probably super normal to not want to leave your kids. Now, of course, the doctor's opinion is it went to an extreme, and that's why she ended up murdering her children to come along with her in death. But the doctor keeps giving him information that can be very helpful for her, and Reddington just cannot accept it. He's offering these things on golden plates, and Reddington just smacks it out of his hand repeatedly. And even the doctor is like, man, learn what I'm trying to do here.
And, you've said so many things. So, number one, why is Reddington so worried about her being described as controlling? I get that the prosecution said that, but the prosecution are idiots, and that's not going to be their actual argument. What he could have done is he could have played into that. He could have played into the anxiety. She was anxious to leave her kids. A lot of people are anxious to leave their kids. But normal anxiety doesn't lead to what we see here, right? So this must have been an incredibly horrific anxiety if it would lead this way. Like, it's not hard to get him to agree that, yeah, man, her mental illness, this wasn't just depression. This was serious depression. This wasn't just anxiety. It was serious anxiety. And it was all coming together. And along with her natural tendency to be in control of things, which isn't a bad thing, combined to just steal her will away from her. And even if he's not willing to come with you to the final point, which he's not, you get him to agree with you on everything except the final diagnosis. And then once again, in closing, you can tell that jury, the doctor agreed with me about everything except his final decision. And you know what he said about it? That it was hard. It took him a long time to reach it. And he had to be careful and he had to be thorough. And when you heard him, did you feel like he was 100% sure? Did you feel like he was sure beyond a reasonable doubt that this is what happened? Because that's not what I heard from him. I heard doubt from that expert, the prosecution's best expert. And if even he is doubting, then you should have doubt too. That's what you do. It's not even hard, but he cannot bring himself to do it. He can't bring himself to come down. And afterwards, he's asked why he was so hot with these. And he said, well, they were trying to hurt Lindsay, and that made me angry. Well, then you need to take a step back because you're now
hurting Lindsay.
Exactly. You're now doing the same thing the prosecution did, where you've let your emotions get in the way and you're no longer functioning as the advocate you could be. You need to be smart, not angry. And this was just one of many mistakes he made throughout this cross-examination.
You know that feeling when you finally clean out a junk drawer that's been bothering you for months? That's what switching to Gusto felt like for my business. Payroll, HR benefits, all the admin chaos that has been piling up finally organized into one place. Gusto is online payroll and benefits software built for small businesses. It's all-in-one, remote-friendly, and incredibly easy to use, so you can pay, hire, onboard, and support your team from anywhere. They make it so easy with automatic payroll, tax filing, simple direct deposits, health benefits, commuter benefits, workers' comp, 401k, you name it. Gusto makes it simple and has options for nearly every budget. They also have unlimited payroll runs for one monthly price. No hidden fees, no surprises. Try Gusto today at gusto.com/prosecutors and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/prosecutors. One more time, gusto.com/prosecutors. Do you ever finish lunch and find yourself reaching for a snack an hour later, or notice cravings take over even when you're trying to eat healthy? That's exactly the problem Pendulum Metabolic Daily was designed to help solve. Pendulum Metabolic Daily is a science-backed probiotic designed to support your body's natural GLP-1 response, help you feel fuller longer, experience fewer cravings, and make it easier to stay on track with your health goals. Just 1 capsule a day with food. Some customers report noticing fewer cravings and more energy in as little as a week, though individual results can vary. Metabolic Daily is a 5-strain probiotic, not just one ingredient doing the work, but a system that supports your metabolism, helps keep your energy steady, and helps cut down on sugar cravings. The key ingredient is Akkermansia, a gut bacterium that helps signal your body to produce more of its natural GLP-1 after eating. That's a hormone that helps regulate appetite and feeling full. Right now, podcast listeners can save up to 48% off their first order at pendulumlife.com/prosecutors. That's pendulumlife.com/prosecutors to save up to 48% off your first order. Again, that's pendulumlife.com/prosecutors and get almost half off today.
Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why customers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
And kind of in a strange way, even though he's like this weird, like, I am so protective of her, he keeps calling Lindsay this young woman, which I thought was kind of infantilizing. But it was a strange thing that he kept doing. Now, he goes through the failures of each of the doctors. He said that before she went to Tufts, Lindsay was happy. But the doctor says, well, not exactly. She goes to Tufts because she's anxious about going to work. And then they go through the text to her mom, asking her mom to come up and help. And they go back through her descent into worse and worse mental health that he testified to yesterday. And this is another point where he should have wrapped his arms around Dr. Heilbrun. Dr. Heilbrun said, yes, December was horrible, objectively across the board. That was a horrible month. You could see that he hurt for her, what she was going through. He didn't say she was faking it. He didn't say that she was minimizing or not saying the truth. He was like, that was a very hard month for her. Reddington asks if Lindsay was ever asked by any of the practitioners if she was having auditory hallucinations. Now, this is where they get into a tussle back and forth. And I hope the jurors heard this, but the tussle led to nowhere except more clarification, which the answer is yes. She was asked every single time if she had thoughts of harming her children and if she had auditory hallucinations. And every time she said no. But she's also having dark thoughts. And he says, yeah, she said that she had dark thoughts. And now he keeps infantilizing her more and more. She was a young woman and now she's a girl. He keeps calling her, but she's just a girl. And he said that Patrick needed to get more information from her. She's been failed by everyone, her practitioners, her husband. And he asked questions a mental health professional would ask. And Heilbrun said she was asked all of this. She denied it. She was asked if she had a plan and she repeatedly said no, she just had thoughts. Lots of people have thoughts. That's why practitioners ask follow-up questions to understand in what context they put these thoughts to best treat them. And she was asked these repeatedly, and she denied them. Now, Lindsay herself told Dr. Heilbrun that she had intrusive thoughts and not auditory hallucinations, which underscores all the other times she was asked by all the other practitioners whether she had auditory hallucinations. He says that she's cooperative and answering honestly. Again, Reddington, wrap your arms around Heilbrun here. This is good. He believes her. He says she's honest and a good mother. Wrap your arms around these answers. This is very good for your case, but he just cannot do so. And he said that December 15th was one of the worst days in her life. In December, she was 7 months away from giving birth to Callan. And so he said what she was going through, very serious, very horrible, real struggles. Not postpartum, though, because it is not tied to postpartum triggering what this is. She was having mental issues. It was depression and bipolar 2. I don't actually completely understand why Reddington has to tie this to postpartum, because we've been very clear across the board. I think everyone can get to the point where she clearly had very, very deep issues. For her to have a mental defect, it doesn't have to be postpartum psychosis. It can be psychosis itself. But I think this is where TikTok has brain rotted him, that this entire case has to be about postpartum mental health only. I think it's become very clear that this is a case of mental health issues, and it doesn't have to rely on whether it's actually triggered by the postpartum time.
I think you've nailed it on that. I think he has become, and there are people out there who it's like they need this to be about postpartum. They need it to be about postpartum because they want to raise awareness about it, or because they've suffered from it and they've had similar. And I understand that. That's fine. But it doesn't actually matter for the case if she has the mental illness. And Reddington could clarify this very easily. He could say to the doctor, so you and I agree she's depressed. She's majorly depressed. You and I agree she's bipolar. Now, you don't think it's postpartum. And that's just because of the DSM-5 and the months. And, I mean, if the exact same symptoms had happened 8 weeks after birth, would you say it's postpartum depression? Yeah. So if I think it's the postpartum depression because I think it lasts a year, you don't because you're arguing about the timeline, we're not really arguing about anything, are we? We're just arguing about what we want to call it. At the end of the day, her symptoms are exactly the same. Whether she had postpartum depression or postpartum psychosis, they're exactly the same, right? And you've said she had major depression, right? So it's not even that important that it's not postpartum. Like, he could have done that and still maintained that it could be. Like, maybe you're just wrong about the timeline. But instead, he fights these weird battles with people who are agreeing with him, who are giving him things like she's bipolar. Take that and run with it. Why is it so important to you that her bipolar is caused by postpartum issues as opposed to just the fact that she took the Zoloft, maybe? You know, I mean, why does that matter so much to you? But he keeps bringing it up. And maybe there's somebody on that jury who will be irritated at the doctors not calling it postpartum depression. Maybe there is, but I really think the core issue is she suffering from some sort of mental disease and defect? He's given you that. You don't have to fight anymore. You don't have to prove it was postpartum depression anymore. He's given you that she had that. The only thing you have to fight about is whether or not the thing he gave you was serious enough to keep her from being able to conform her behavior. And it's just, he's fighting over the wrong things. But that's what he does. So then we go through this, her not fitting into women and infants program, that she was offered treatment for medication management, which was a complaint she had, that for a general mental health program or continued outpatient management. And this is one of those times where there are times where it seems like he's heading in the right direction, that he's about to get good information out of Kirk, but he's so out of control of his own emotions that he just can't get out of his own way. And he keeps trying to act like Kirk doesn't know what he's talking about, but he so obviously does. And instead of just getting good information out of him, he keeps trying to beat him down and failing. And I think it sends a message to the jury that he's afraid of him, and he's concerned that the jury is going to believe what he says. So we go through this whole thing where Reddington has him read the discharge information from women and infants, because Reddington is just adamant that the whole reason they did not allow her in was just about the medication. And that's just not true. And you know it's not going to go well when the expert's trying to find it and you want him to find it, and then your opponent's like, oh, it's exhibit 182, page 8. You know, that's probably where you want to look. Commonwealth obviously wouldn't tell him that if it wasn't good for him. And sure enough, when we actually look at the records, it turns out that the medication aspect. It's only a minor aspect of why she was not allowed into women and infants. The real reason was this postpartum issue that was so late in the game. There's a minor indication of possibility of medication side effects that we're going to talk about later. But the whole reason they even put that is because Lindsay and Patrick said that was the problem. And so it's a rule out diagnosis, which means it's possible, it's something to rule out, but it's not that the hospital is saying this is the issue. They're saying, hey, people in the future, this is something she's concerned about. You should figure out whether or not that's true. At this point, Reddington, he wants to confront him with records, but he's not prepared to do so. So we have to take our break so he can dig through his boxes and get out the records.
So then we come back and we do go through the records. Reddington asks him about some quotes, some of which he used in his own reports. This was a little frustrating because he would read long quotes. Remember, he looked at thousands of pages, and he did write a report, but I don't remember everything I write. And he'd be like, where is this coming from? He's like, did you not read the records? It's like, there are a lot of words in all of these records, and I want to be precise in how I answer them. But he kind of does that shtick with the doctor. They go through her issues, as we have many times. Again, no need to harp on this. This is where, again, you can hug the doctor close because he agrees with you on all these issues. He doesn't minimize them at all. Now, once again, they highlight that Gelada. He called her Dr. Gelada, and then Dr. Heilbrun was like, Dr. Gelada? Nurse practitioner Gelada.
And then he was like, it's like major and colonel. And I'm like, I don't think that's actually
strange.
How it works.
It was just another example, honestly, where at least Dr. Heilbrun kind of held his cool and showed that he was the expert in the room. How Gelada didn't call women and infants back. Now, they talk about Patrick asking her a question, and he said, what did you do? She said, when he found her outside, this factored into Dr. Heilbrun's opinion. When he said, what did you do? She responded, I tried to kill myself. And he said, where are the kids? She said, in the basement. Yet again, and I don't say this lightly, I think this is actually what's happening. This is why it's affecting the way Reddington is crossing. I think Reddington's been scrolling through too many TikToks, which is now suggesting that these questions are not on the 911 tape. And so it's unclear why this particular part would necessarily be on the 911 tape. And it's unclear if Reddington is saying that Patrick lied about that, what she said at the time or not. Remember, Patrick is on the defense's side. So it's not really clear. There's no conspiracy here. Patrick himself, who testified, is suing the doctors and is on Lindsay's side of all of this, that she has no criminal liability, said this himself. So I don't know what Reddington is trying to do except to make hay.
And I'll just say this. Number one, I don't know if when he asked that, he'd even called 911 yet. But the other thing, all of us should be angry at Reddington for this. I was angry at Reddington for this. Patrick certainly should be angry at him for this. This is the conspiracy theory. This is part of the conspiracy theory that Patrick said she said that. There's no way she could have said that because of her injuries. And that's proof that Patrick is the one who did it. So, Reddington, I've given him credit when he asked questions to debunk the theory, which he did with the hypothermia, where he got the doctor to explain that. But this was BS. He should be ashamed of himself. He never should have done this. It was completely inappropriate and improper. It did nothing for him. All it did was stoke the crazies out there who want to blame a man whose children are dead for murdering them when he knows his client did it. This was complete BS, and I didn't like it. There are a lot of ways to address what she said without lying to the jury, because I essentially think that's what it is. I feel like he just lied to the jury. He fed them a conspiracy theory. He should be ashamed of himself. This was a low point in this trial. It was a low point for him, and hopefully this is the last time he engages in this kind of conspiracy theory BS and brings it into this trial, because it doesn't belong in this trial at all.
Amen to that. Then he continues his cross, and the doctor talks about Lindsay's poor reaction to medication and how she's a kind of person who has the opposite reactions than you'd expect from these drugs. And Reddington says, you look at her right now and you say whether or not she had adverse reactions to medication, which is literally what he just testified to. And so he's like, yes, that's exactly what I just said. It was like he was doing the script, but the words didn't match. And he says, yes, she had adverse reactions up to and including January. Again, a great opportunity for Reddington to have wrapped him up and said he wanted this whole medication-induced psychosis or whatnot. He's giving it to you right here, right now. He admits she's not drug shopping. She's trying really hard to help herself. But these drugs, they're affecting her in a way that they shouldn't. Maybe it's the bipolar. Maybe it's something else. Maybe she's one of the, small percentage of people where these drugs are not reacting in her body like they should. You're right. They didn't take blood tests. They didn't take thyroid tests. I don't know what that would have told you about what you prescribe her. Wrap him up. I think the doctor would agree with you here.
Exactly. And he could have said, you've acknowledged that she had negative effects. You've acknowledged they were causing these problems. The drugs were causing these problems. You've acknowledged she's bipolar. SSRIs, not great for bipolar, right? Can you say for certain that the effect of medications didn't cause what happened on January 24th? Can you say for certain that didn't happen? I don't think there's any way the doctor would have said, oh no, there's no way the drugs caused that. He's not going to say that. He might say, well, I think it's unlikely. You know what unlikely means? Possible. You know what you can argue to the jury later on? Their own doctor said it was possible that the medication caused this. Like, normally, the beyond a reasonable doubt standard is completely irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. People either believe they did it or they don't. They don't really quibble about beyond a reasonable doubt. This is not that case. This is a case where beyond a reasonable doubt really matters. Where there are going to be jurors struggling with that, who believe she's guilty, but am I sure? Am I sure enough? And being able to point to testimony by the expert where he says, I'm not sure. That would be so powerful, but he just can't get there. And so we move on. So at this point, he keeps asking, like, you're saying, there's no problem with her taking notes. There's no problem with her doing this. And he keeps saying, I never said there was a problem with it. I'm just looking at the information. I don't know why Reddington is trying to downplay her symptoms. I don't know why Reddington's trying to make it seem like everything she did was normal. And like, you would think Reddington's looking for there being problems and wants things to be unusual. But instead, he keeps harping on how none of this stuff is actually unusual. And you would think he could use them in his favor, but he can't. All he can do is argue with the doctor, even when they're in agreement. Then we get to the whole beach blanket bingo thing, which is Beachbody. I guess he's trying to say that her being one of the millions of people who's involved with Beachbody and sells Beachbody products is risky behavior and therefore mania. He never really quite gets there, but I guess that's what he's trying to say because she lost money on it. Completely irrelevant. I don't think the jury would see that. And then they start arguing about mania and whether or not, are you sure that clean out the basement isn't mania? Are you sure that the exercising isn't mania? The doctor has literally diagnosed her with bipolar 2. He agrees the mania is probably there. We just don't have the evidence to see it. And it's so weird. It's one thing to fight with the last doctor who said she wasn't bipolar about possible manic episodes. It is weird to argue with him about it, but he continues to do it anyways. Now, it's possible that being in an active psychotic state could affect your ability to process information. This was a good point. Reddington makes like 3 good points in 3 hours or whatever, and it could affect your memory. This is the way to deal with the inconsistent statements. He should have started with this. The reason she's telling you something different 3.5 years later, if she was in a psychotic state, wouldn't you expect there to be inconsistencies? Of course there would be. And guess what we have? Inconsistencies, but instead we bury this in the middle of this whole circus. They talk about the screen being cut. Apparently it was not cut. This is something Lindsay told a bunch of people. I don't know why she said this. And Dr. Kirk's like, didn't seem like a big deal to me. There were inconsistencies that mattered. That one didn't seem like a big deal to me. They go back through this whole disassociation thing, and he explains it again. That's the sense you're removed from yourself. It is an altered mental state, but it's not necessarily any evidence of psychosis.
So then they return to that whole thought broadcasting thing, because we're going back to whether she heard a voice or not, right? He said that she said it to other people. Now, Reddington loses his mind over this because the doctor doesn't say specifically who Lindsay said it to. This is honestly a weird attack. I didn't understand where Reddington was coming from, because if Lindsay had thought broadcasting and was telling people about it, I don't know how that would necessarily help Reddington.
Well, it certainly doesn't help him that he doesn't know specifically who she told.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean,
yeah.
But it's just one of those things where he's taking cheap shots that don't get him anything.
Right. Then we go back to his favorite DSM, and they spend some time attacking the DSM. I think this is a little bit of a waste of time here because you can all just agree that it's not in the DSM, and maybe that's a problem. And this is part of the bigger problem we need to have about mental health and postpartum health for women. But they do some of that. And then, so remember, the doctor concluded that she did not have a command hallucination. But if she did have a genuine command hallucination, would that mean she couldn't conform? And this is a good question. And the doctor tries to answer because, again, this is where you could argue in closing. So he thinks she doesn't have command hallucination. Who are you going to believe? The mother sitting here before you today who loved her children, built snowmen with them, and she tells you that she heard this voice. Are you going to believe her? Or some doctor who spent a couple hours with her, read some papers about her? He doesn't know anything about her. That's how you argue in the closing. But instead of letting the doctor answer, Reddington just doesn't let him answer. After being cut off multiple times, the doctor just said, it depends. I don't know what to say about that, because that actually could have been a really good answer for Reddington. Now, Reddington once again goes through the depression symptoms and asks if they are consistent with postpartum depression, which they obviously are. And the doctor doesn't disagree with him here. Then he does the same thing with psychosis.
And can I just say, I'm insulted every time he says, I'm not talking about some guy who lost a job. The people who lost their jobs can be in legitimate depression, deep, major depression. You don't have to belittle those people. And once again, you don't know everything that's ever happened in the background of the jury. There may be some juror over there who lost their job and was really depressed about it. And every time you say that, they're like, F you, buddy. He just throws stuff around like he knows these people deeply, and he doesn't. And I don't understand it.
And that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about it in this way until really the past couple cross-examinations. In order to lift up postpartum mental struggles, you don't have to push down all other mental struggles. And that can actually be hurting your case here if the jurors are like, yeah, we're there with you. Bipolar 2, major depressive disorder, all of these things. Does it really matter if it's postpartum? Can it just be that it's really serious depression? Because I get depression. I understand that. It may not be postpartum depression, but I understand that. Is that bad for the defense's case? No, I think it's actually really good. So I don't understand why he has to draw this stark distinction between the two, and not just draw a stark distinction between mental health and then postpartum mental health, but he actually has to minimize all other mental health, which I don't think helps Lindsay's case.
Okay, so that's the end of that. And what did he accomplish, really? I mean, did he do anything to demolish the doctor's ultimate conclusion? Did he do anything to bring him over to his side? Did he score any points, really? Honestly, he didn't. He belittled a man who obviously knows exactly what he's talking about, was very cool, very calm, very collected, a great expert. When you see an expert like that, you better turn him to your side, because you're not going to make him seem like he's not credible. Maybe he succeeded with Mac, because Mac's kind of a weird guy, to be honest. A little bit of a weird affect, a little bit of a weird way of approaching things. And then the Zoom thing helped him. So maybe he did. Maybe the way he acted with him worked. But a really good lawyer would have seen, can't do that with this guy. I'm going to bring this guy close. I'm going to get as much out of him as I can, and then I'm going to get done. That's what he should have done. He didn't do that. So now we're on redirect. And the prosecution makes the point, I guess helpfully for them, I don't know, that, hey, all this talk about postpartum, it doesn't really matter, right? Because the symptoms for postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis are the same as general depression, major depression, and psychosis, which, of course, he agrees. And he also agrees that the symptoms for depression are the symptoms of bipolar 2, which once again, you would think is helpful for the defense. Now he says, look, absolutely, better to interview her earlier, but he also had the ability to watch the interview that Resnick did because it was recorded. And he said the records in this case were exceedingly thorough. He said, hey, normally I have to work a lot harder to be able to do this just to get 10% of the information records I had in this case.
In fact, he said, and he's done so many of these, right? He's the expert of experts. He said, this is the best record case I've ever gotten. I had more to work with in this case than any other case I've been an expert in. I thought that was actually pretty astounding, especially given his experience.
So, once again, the prosecution's making points that I would assume would be good for the defense. But the prosecution is now rebuilding him and restoring his credibility by going after things that he was crossed on that he probably shouldn't have been crossed on, because they actually helped the defense. So now we have the prosecution pointing out that Lindsay had legitimate concerns about medication and had a lot of adverse effects, particularly Seroquel, and the Seroquel had affected her really badly. So they make that point, which is a good point for the defense, and you'd think one the defense would have wanted to make. Now, a good point for the prosecution that they do bring out is the worst medications for her and the ones that affected her the most, she was off of after she left McLean. So September to December, including in December when everything was the worst, she gets off of that when she leaves McLean. And I got to tell you, the more I think about this and the more I think about what he said yesterday about how with people who are in severe depression, the most dangerous time is when they start to come out of it, when they start to have more of that energy and more of that ability to follow through. And that's when you start seeing suicide. And then thinking about how, December was the really bad time. Like January doesn't seem like the really bad time. The symptoms aren't as bad. She's even sleeping some in January, more than she was before. She's off the really bad drugs. And yet January is when this happens. The more I think about that, the more I think about what he said, it's like, man, this all really does fit together on this being more about suicide than about psychosis. So he also talks about the differences between what she said and thought broadcasting, because this comes out a lot. So thought broadcasting is when you hear a voice, like you're hearing my voice, and you turn to somebody and you say, did you just hear that? And they're like, what are you talking about? You know, trope from every haunted house movie you've ever seen. So it's that kind of thing. It's not, she was having these intrusive thoughts and they were powerful. And they were so powerful that she did, I guess, at one point ask her mom, like, man, these thoughts I'm having, which are my own thoughts, are so loud. Like, I'm worried people can hear them sometimes. So different from thought broadcasting, still like a bad symptom, I would think, whether it's thought broadcasting or not. And this is one of those things where I feel like Reddington should have been like, I got it. It's not thought broadcasting. But let's talk about what she actually said. Seems pretty bad that your intrusive thoughts are so intrusive that you think maybe somebody could hear them, right? That's bad. Like, whatever you want to call it. Not thought broadcasting, but that's bad. I feel like you could have hit on that more. But instead, we're arguing about, once again, about terms. Is it postpartum depression or just depression? Is it thought broadcasting or just very intrusive thoughts that are so powerful that you think people can hear them? That would have been a good point to hit on, but he doesn't do that.
That's a great point here. Remember, the people on the jury are not medical professionals. They don't know the DSM. They're not bound by what's in the DSM. I can see a very effective closing argument that says, call it what you want. I'm no doctor. Intrusive thoughts, voices, whatever you want to label this. What we know is this was so overpowering. Sure, these doctors want to call it intrusive thoughts. It was so intrusive, it crowded out all rational thinking, all criminal liability. How can she possibly have any space left in her mind? She said this over and over. So you want to call that intrusive thoughts? You want to call that thought broadcasting? I don't care about labels. I want to talk about what was going on in her head. And in her head, there were these thoughts that forced her to do these things that her own hands would never do to her own children. That's what you do. And this is why mental defect is a legal term. It's not a DSM. I'd harp on that. You're not asked to be doctors. You're not asked to be a diagnostician. You don't have to write a diagnostic code. You don't have to go by those check boxes where it says, check bipolar 1, check bipolar 2. You use your experience and what you heard here today. Does this sound like a cold-hearted killer in front of you? Or does it sound like a woman suffering, trying so hard to do everything she could not, because these thoughts crowded out every ounce of rational thinking until all she could do was action alone, actions that were not her own. That's what you do, Reddington. I'm sorry, I just convinced myself that she's okay, right? I mean, the whole time I was actually very frustrated with him because I could see where this cross-examination could be so effective and strike at the hearts of the men and women on this jury. They're not doctors. And they're not called to be doctors. They're called to be a jury of her peers. And he could have used that to his complete strength in talking to these experts.
I hate to say this because I kept thinking, what would Alan Jackson do with this?
Yeah.
Because I feel like Alan Jackson would have used this in a much different way. I think he would have done that. Because Alan Jackson knew when to be... I didn't like Alan Jackson. I don't like Alan Jackson, just to be clear. But I can respect the fact that he knew when to be the hammer and he knows when not to be. And he's able to do both. And I don't know, everyone talks about how Reddington's this great lawyer, and maybe he is, and maybe he was. I don't know. But didn't see it today. And that's just all there is to it.
And don't worry, those of you in the chat who are like, don't give Reddington ideas for his closing. Don't worry.
He's not listening to us.
I'm not showing up on his algorithm, y'all. No algorithm over here. You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you might not know yet. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. They make it super simple. Pop over to progressive.com, answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with coverage options tailored to your choices. Plus, you'll see which discounts you may qualify for, like the online quote discount or savings for paying in full. In fact, 99% of Progressive Auto customers earn at least one discount. See if you could save when you switch to Progressive. You'll feel good about making a savvy choice. Visit progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little extra cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates, national average 12-month savings of $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary. Running a business means you're always reachable until you're not. And the moment you miss that call, that text, that follow-up, a competitor is the one that picks it up. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the business phone system built so you never miss an opportunity. All your calls, texts, and voicemails live in one place, so anyone on your team can pick up a conversation, see the full history, and respond fast. That's why Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by over 90,000 businesses who rely on it to stay reachable and look professional every day. And you can set it up in minutes on any device. Keep your existing number and add teammates as you grow. No IT, no hassle. Money is on the line. Always say hello with Quo. Try Quo for free. Plus, get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/prosecutors. That's QUO.com/prosecutors. Then they talk about where this anxiety started. And he says this process started with anxiety about returning to work. Again, such a human thing that I think Reddington can really use to his benefit. He doesn't know those jurors, but I bet every one of them understands something that may seem rote that actually can cause immense anxiety, like returning to work after having a baby. Now, she never told any providers or hospitals that she had thoughts of harming her children. And they go through the women and infants records, which make clear that their program was not for her because of the postpartum issues, but they did recognize she needed help. We've been through this multiple times. I'm very convinced by this. She was not someone who was turned away and said, you don't need help, go home. She was given 3 options of programs that better fit her. Honestly, it's like, I can't even think of a good example here. Like, I'm going to the shoe store and they only sell men's shoes and my feet are too small for them. And they're like, we can't serve you, ma'am, because none of these shoes fit you. If we sold it to you, we take your money and you can't use these. Instead, why don't you go to these 3 other stores which carry your size? They're not turning her away. They're saying, this is not what you're suffering from, which, by the way, goes along with the experts. They're not saying she doesn't have serious mental issues. They're saying it's not postpartum tied. And this program, you can imagine, I don't know, I haven't been to the women and infants program, but I can imagine if it's focused on specifically the postpartum era, 3 to 4 weeks after having a baby, there may be some very different things that they are geared towards her that just won't apply to Lindsay.
And someone sent us an email about this, and it's total speculation, and I don't know, but they had suffered from some of these issues, and they talked about the stigma that mental illness carries. And they wondered if part of this was that Lindsay and Patrick really wanted to believe this was postpartum, because postpartum issues can be cured, they're temporary, and they go away. And when it was suggested that she might be bipolar, what was the response? Silence from Lindsay and Patrick saying, my wife is not bipolar. So Women and Infants is offering other treatment. They're saying, look, you don't really fit postpartum. What about some of these other programs? And those were just not going to be something that she was going to want to do, that they were going to want to do as a couple, because for whatever reason, they were resistant to the idea that it was and I don't mean this in any negative way, a typical mental illness rather than a postpartum mental illness.
And then they go through how in the records, it's actually Patrick and Lindsay who say that she was over-medicated, and that they listed rule out on adverse drug effects, which means it's possible, but not yet confirmed. So Lindsay's mental health did get worse through December. Then it got somewhat better after that. So what would it depend upon for command hallucinations? What are the symptoms of psychosis that don't necessarily take away your control and responsibility? And this is where he's clear. You can be psychotic or even have command hallucinations, but still have control and responsibility. Now, someone experiencing psychosis can conform their behavior to the law. And you know the difference between right and wrong? Yes, in some cases. So this is a very nuanced thing. This is why, again, we said that there's a trial in this case. It's not enough even if she had psychosis, even if she heard voices. I think thus far the evidence shows she did not hear a voice and she was not in psychosis.
And what was so interesting about this point is it made me think about something we've talked about before. How so many people, when we've questioned whether or not she was in psychosis, and we've pointed to various evidence that she's not, will say, well, if you're in psychosis, you can carry on a normal life. You can carry on normal conversations. You can answer a telephone call. You can look up directions on. And it's like, when he said this, I was like, oh, yeah, you can do all those things. And if that's the kind of psychosis you're in, you also can conform your behavior to the law and know the difference between right and wrong. So if that's the kind of psychosis she had, isn't that bad for her? And it goes back to this whole, can you say no to the voice thing that we talked about a while ago, and now the experts are talking about too. You know, and we kind of treated it in the beginning like, if psychosis, not guilty, right? That's sort of the way I think all of us have talked about it. If she's in psychosis, then she's not guilty. She wasn't able to conform her behavior. But now it's like, actually, no, it's more nuanced than that. It's not if psychosis guilty. You still have to show that inability to conform. And so that evidence, even if it's not evidence that she wasn't in psychosis, may still be evidence that she could conform her behavior and know the difference between right and wrong. And this was a really interesting point the prosecution brought out right at the end of their redirect. Then we get to recross. Reddington brings up the MMPI and the K scale. It's not elevated on anything but suicide. She wasn't malingering. She wasn't doing any of that stuff. We talked briefly about Resnick's most recent research on auditory hallucinations. Dr. Kirk had cited one of his articles. He did not cite the most recent one. The way Reddington describes it is like his old article's out of date. I don't know that Resnick would describe that. It's just he now has an additional article on this, an additional study. The doctor had not read that study. Apparently, you know, its auditory hallucinations can be internal is the way that Reddington describes it. I don't know that anyone is saying that's not true. It's just when you conceptualize the auditory hallucination, it seems like it's an outside voice. I mean, I think it naturally would be an internal voice. I don't know. I didn't really understand exactly. He didn't go into it enough. Frankly, if that was the point he wanted to make, he really should have spent more time on that and maybe done it in the cross. But he didn't do that. So we got just a very brief, blurry image of that. And he didn't. And I think, why didn't you talk to Resnick about that? Like, if you're going to make the argument that these really were auditory hallucinations, not intrusive thoughts, shouldn't we spend some time on Resnick about this latest research? Which makes me think the latest research is not actually as helpful to Reddington as he tried to make it out to be, because if he really dug into it, you would see that it's not. So instead, it's a throwaway thing in recross that he hopes will convince some juror, oh, okay, well, that's probably what happened. So that's how it ends. Then we have what we think and what we hope and what we pray is the last witness of this case. I am as ready to go to closings as I've ever been in a case. Honestly, I'm not even sure it was a good idea to call this person. I don't even know that we needed this person, but we called him anyways. Dr. Gregory Saathoff. And he's an interesting guy. Very slow talker. If you're listening to this before listening to the testimony, good for you, because that means you can put it on at least 1.5. You might even be able to do 2 on this guy. I listened to the trial on 1.5, and people kept talking about this guy, and I was like, sounds fine. And then I slowed it down to 1, and I was like, oh, I see. On 1, it is a little different. He's very, very deliberate. He's very thoughtful. he often will be asked questions and he thinks about the question. Not a bad thing, but it can go on for several seconds where he's just like thinking about it. Be like, what's your name? Saathoff. I mean, I don't know. So he has
that wasn't an exaggeration. That's why I laughed so hard, because it was a really good impersonation.
He really does that. Can't wait to see Reddington with him, because it's going to be an interesting experience. But he is a professor of emergency medicine and public health sciences at UVA. Very interesting guy. He is the senior psychiatrist for the behavioral analysis unit in Quantico and has been so for a while. I need to ask Julia if she knows him and ever worked with him or anything, but very, very experienced guy when it comes to behavioral analysis and crime.
I'll say this about the prosecution. They really went out and got, I think, incredibly qualified experts in this case. Like, all of these people, I'm not necessarily dogging the other side's experts. These are just very qualified experts. And I'll say this much, especially as it relates to Dr. Kirk. I think when they went out to get them, they went on their resumes, and each of these experts were so qualified and they had a lot of experience. They didn't necessarily need to work on this case, which you want someone who is just looking at the case rather than chasing fame. Was a bit of a risk taking. They did not know how these doctors would come out. And you'll see what they're slightly different. They're not like completely in the bag for everything the prosecution wants to say. So I will say props to the prosecution on this, because I think they went out and got these experts not knowing what they would say. And then as they got these experts' reports back, they were very convinced that this is indeed a case that needed to move forward with prosecution. So I know we've been very hard on the prosecution, but I will say props to that.
They've done great on cross-examination, and they've done great on rebuttal. I mean, they really have. They've had a few little mess-ups, but generally speaking, as long as I love Jesus, but we need to keep Jesus out of this. And if they could do that, they'd be a little bit better off. As I said, he's in the behavioral analysis unit. He's testified 40 to 45 times as a forensic psychologist. He is not board certified, which normally might be a bad thing. But the reason is because he went into the military as a psychiatrist and then moved over to FBI because, as we're going to see, he did something really cool. And frankly, he didn't have time to do a 1-year fellowship, which is what you have to do to get board certified. So he said, forget that noise. I'm just going to actually work in the field. He's evaluated 5 to 7 women who killed their children, diagnosed them, and worked with a team to address their obviously serious mental issues. He's treated thousands of patients who've had psychosis. He works at the state hospital in Charlottesville because he is a UVA professor, and he's dealt with some of the most severely mentally ill people imaginable. What a really interesting thing he did. So I guess there was something called bromocriptine, which essentially it stops lactation. So if you're someone who doesn't want to breastfeed, they would give you this drug and it would stop lactation. Apparently, he and a couple other people discovered that it also causes postpartum psychosis. And he and 4 other psychiatrists wrote an article on it. And eventually it led to the FDA taking this drug off the market in 1994. So kind of a big deal. Apparently this was the article that got the attention of the FBI, and he ends up at the BAU. So interesting guy, especially at 1.5 speed.
Especially at 1.5 speed. Yeah, so he then talks about hallucinations. He says that auditory hallucinations are the most common of hallucinations, though you can have other perceptual disturbances. Now, psychosis can show itself through delusions, fixed false beliefs, and they can be bizarre or non-bizarre. But he says psychosis is a symptom of mental illness rather than a mental illness in and of itself. I thought this was interesting. Now, there are many different possible causes for psychosis. Everything from mental health issues to drug abuse to brain tumors that push against your brain and cause it to have auditory hallucinations. Now, some people can benefit from mental health treatment, but some serious mental illnesses are pretty much beyond full treatment, which is terrifying. But I think that also shows you how, for him to recognize this, I think is very serious, because it also cuts against this whole, if something goes wrong, you've been failed. He's saying, I've treated the worst of the worst. We don't understand the human brain. There are illnesses that basically you cannot treat. That was just very enlightening for me as we're having these broader discussions about mental illness. Now, he did a forensic evaluation of Lindsay Clancy, And he does his work through UVA. So unlike the other experts who are, retained or paid hourly, he doesn't get paid directly by the Commonwealth. Rather, the department at UVA receives any funds and he gets a salary from them. So in this case, he reviewed the records, videos, reports from the government and the defense. And it was a very significant list of materials that were available to review, which is what we've heard from the other experts as well. And he interviewed Lindsay by Zoom for about 5 hours total. He said that, of course, it'd always be better to interview someone in person, but he's also done Zoom interviews before and it's worked just fine. He said there are advantages since you don't have to take notes as it's being recorded, so you can actually focus more on the questions and the answers of the person you're talking to. He said that he also interviewed Patrick Clancy on Zoom.
And let me just say, tomorrow, when you're watching the cross-examination, do not drink every time Reddington says television. Because he's going to say it at least 50 times, and you will be dead. So don't do it. Now, he's going to do that even though half his experts have been on Zoom, but that's okay. We're definitely going to hear that tomorrow.
So I have these running lists of pieces that I've always been hunting forever because they're just at such high prices. I can't quite bring myself to buy them, whether it's just the perfect dress from Tucker Nuck or honestly, these football jerseys that my kids want, but they're so expensive. I think, and then all of a sudden they're gone from online. I can't find them anywhere until I found them on Poshmark for way less than what I could get them for anywhere else. I have to tell you guys about Poshmark because I love it. Poshmark is the leading fashion resale marketplace shaped by real people and real style. Millions of new and pre-loved items from daily wardrobe staples to vintage and luxury fashion, archive-worthy pieces you thought you missed forever to current essentials and one-of-a-kind vintage finds. It's all there. And when you're ready for a closet refresh, you can even earn money by selling the pieces you're ready to part with, reaching more than 80 million users on the platform. Recently, I had this beautiful leather bag that I've been looking for so long, but I could not stomach the full price. And I kept looking and I finally got online and I saw it. Oh my goodness, it was the most beautiful bag. And I'm so glad I found it on Poshmark for a fraction of the price it was still being sold in stores. You can find out what I'm talking about at Poshmark. New deals and styles are listed every day, so don't wait. Download the Poshmark app and use code Prosecutors when you sign up to get $10 off your first purchase. Or shop now at Poshmark.com/prosecutors and get $10 off your first purchase. That's Poshmark.com/prosecutors. All right, ladies, can we normalize the fact that your period deserves better than dry toilet paper? If you've ever wished you could take a shower in the 3 minutes you've got between Zoom calls, get a Tushy bidet. Quick, gentle, refreshing, and exactly what you want when you're not feeling your best. And let's just say it, it's also awesome for new moms because you can really take care of yourself while you have a newborn with the Tushy bidet. I got the Tushy bidet and I thought, what am I going to do with a bidet? And now I cannot live without it. It was so easy to install it. It looks just like it's part of my bathroom. You can't even tell there's something extra, but when you sit down, it is like being at a spa because the cleaning experience is way better compared to traditional toilet paper. I can't believe I ever didn't have the Tushy bidet. Tushy bidet transforms your bathroom wellness for life, gut to butt to bowl. A game changer for periods, postpartum recover, IBS, constipation, or just feeling fresh in seconds after a workout. Tushy brings the comfort of clean, instantly warm water to your everyday routine. Give your body the care it deserves. For a limited time, our listeners get 10% off their first bidet order when you use code Prosecutors at checkout. That's 10% off your first bidet order at hellotushy.com with promo code Prosecutors.
We get a more fulsome explanation of this story that Lindsay told him, which is the same story that she told Dr. Mack and Dr. Kirk, which I think is interesting. He says that Lindsay told him that she was at the refrigerator when she received the call from Patrick. Now, remember, the call from Patrick's important. Patrick says she seemed like she was busy. It seemed like she was in the middle of something. Most of us, and if you look at the timeline and you look at the Apple Watch and you look at the phone, most of us think this is after she's killed the kids. After she's killed at least 2 of the kids. Probably all the kids, honestly. I think, frankly, she was killing Callan when the call came in. And then she went upstairs, took the phone call. And if you see her phone, then she goes up another flight of stairs where she ends up in the bedroom. And then the phone ends up on the bed. So it really seems like that's what she's doing. He says that the refrigerator was open. She was getting chicken nuggets for the kids. And that's when the call came in. She has the call with Patrick. She misses the call, I guess, because she's getting chicken nuggets or whatever. She calls him back. And then after the call is when the voice starts. It's after the call, not when he leaves. Now, this is problematic for a couple reasons. Number one, we know for certain that at least one of the kids was already eating chicken nuggets on the couch when Patrick left. We know that for certain. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that, 15 minutes after he left, 20 minutes after he left, I'd have to look at the exact timeline when the call comes in, but it's not exactly in the middle, as Dr. Kirk described it.
I think it's 18 minutes after he leaves.
There you go. That she's still getting chicken nuggets, I guess, for Cora, despite the fact that it seems like the snacks had already started when Patrick was getting ready to leave. This seems like an inconsistency. And inconsistencies like that are important as they shine lights on her mental state and whether or not what she is reporting back to you is true or not. And these widely divergent reports can raise questions. Now, as I said, she says to him, called him back, hung up, here comes the voice. Interestingly, and we never heard from this doctor, this is not the story she told Spinelli, which is the defense expert. The defense expert who was supposed to testify about postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. She told Spinelli what I'm going to call the truth, which is that the voice came as soon as Patrick left on his errands. Now, I say that's the truth. I think that is her initial story, and I think that's the story she's told for a long time. If there was a voice, it literally happened as he's driving away. If it didn't happen then, there was no voice. That's my position on this, and that's what she told Spinelli, and it's an inconsistency with what she told all of the prosecution experts. She said to him, and remember, he's not with Mac and Dr. Kirk. He's talking to her on Zoom. She tells him the exact same thing she told the other 2 doctors, and the exact same thing that's in her complaint. Kill the kids so you can kill yourself. This is your last chance. And that this is over and over and over again. Now, she also indicated that her children would suffer if she didn't do that. And, one of our great theories of true crime is that there's truth in every lie. And what's interesting about this is she's got both of Dr. Kirk's choices in this statement. He said it's one of 2 things: psychosis due to command hallucination or altruistic filicide after a suicide. She tells him both. I had the command voice, and oh, by the way, I was concerned that my kids wouldn't be okay if I killed myself. He tells them both. And she said this was an external voice, and it was constant. It repeated over and over and over again. But as soon as she finished strangling Callan, it stopped. Now, he said there are a few things that are significant about this. Number one, it's significant that she had not spoken about hearing this voice before that, or really any voices before that. That is not typical. It is also not typical to hear a voice that's constant like this rather than intermittent. And he has never seen the voice stop once the act is done. That is not typical. Doing the act does not cure the psychosis. And it's also not typical to hear a voice without an accompanying delusion.
And look, I know we're going to get into his expertise or not, but he literally discovered how a certain drug caused psychosis and really has treated women who have committed filicide. And unlike the other experts that Reddington has tried to say, you've never even written an article about this. He has, specifically about postpartum psychosis and a drug that helped cause it, right? This was really stunning to me because he has experience in this. And we know that this all sounded atypical. But for him, having treated women 5 to 7 who've killed their children and helping them through their mental issues before and after this, to say he's never seen the voice stop. And how interesting. I had never thought about that. I guess I could see some sort of reasoning that you do the action to make the voice stop. But if you're saying the voice does not ever stop, even when the act is done, but that is what's reported here, I thought was a very, very blast of cold air in my face of truth.
If you did this and the voice stopped, wouldn't the first thing you do call 911?
Yes.
I mean...
Or why kill yourself?
Because I could imagine if she said, and then the voice changed, then it was kill yourself, kill yourself, kill yourself. That would be different. But the voice, the command hallucination, you're a puppet in your own body. And I almost imagine it's like, she snaps out of it, the voice ends, and she's looking down, and there's Callan with an exercise band wrapped around his throat. And I can imagine wanting to kill yourself at that point. I can imagine that. But also, it's strange to me that at that point, you wouldn't immediately unwrap all the bands from all your children and call 911 and be like, oh my goodness, I was under this command hallucination and I did this horrible thing. Please come save my children. But that's not what happens. So, I don't know.
So at this point, Reddington asks for a Daubert hearing, which is where you challenge who's being put on as an expert. A Daubert challenge is just to say they're not qualified to be an expert. Isn't it too late for this? Don't you have to do Daubert hearings
So I don't know what's going on here,
yeah.
But I will note, Reddington has been constantly objecting every time he makes any kind of opinion statement.
Maybe there was a Daubert ruling before that the judge has held over. I actually don't know what's going on.
And I don't understand why this person would not be an expert.
He literally wrote postpartum psychosis articles.
Yeah, when he gave his background, it's like clearly he's an expert on this stuff. So I don't really understand.
And just so you know, so it's not uncommon to challenge the expertise of someone, and that's what a Daubert challenge is. Very often, there's even Daubert challenge deadlines within a scheduling order, and they are not typically in the middle of trial. You can imagine why. You want to know what's going to be able to come into trial. This is usually something that's briefed and argued well in advance of trial, and you know ahead of time, because if they're disqualified as an expert, usually you're scrambling to find another expert, or you don't build your case around it because you know it's not going to come in. So I was confused by this because if it's the first time he's challenged his expertise, it would seemingly be too late. The only thing I can think of is he previously challenged his expertise. I don't know on what basis, because he seems very qualified. The judge already ruled against him, and he's objecting and asking for it to preserve it for appeal, but it's already preserved for appeal when there's a ruling against you. So again, I'm not really sure, but the judge overrules his request for a Daubert hearing, so they don't stop, dismiss the jury, and have a Daubert hearing here.
And maybe, honestly, this may be something we see tomorrow. When the prosecution rests, it's possible he's going to ask for a Daubert hearing, jury's going to be sent out, we're going to do some voir dire, and the judge could strike his whole testimony. That can happen. The judge can say, you're not an expert after all. Jury disregard all that testimony. Very rare for that to happen. And I don't know on what basis that would happen. But that was pretty interesting to me. I'm really curious about what we're at least going to see it in his cross.
Was it because he interviewed her by Zoom? I mean, like I'm trying to, did anyone else interview her by Zoom? That's not the basis of Daubert, because the Daubert isn't about how you do it. Is it because he's not board certified? But that's not a requirement.
And just to be clear, because we're talking like everybody knows what we're talking about. So Daubert is the Supreme Court case called Daubert by certain senators from Louisiana that is the basis for whether or not you're an expert. So Rule 703, I think, covers expert opinions. Experts are not fact witnesses. They can give opinions about things of which they have no personal knowledge, right? Based on their expertise. Exactly. They can consider hearsay. They can consider a lot of different things. You don't have to have a degree to be an expert. Once again, most famous example of a qualified expert, My Cousin Vinny. If you've seen My Cousin Vinny, what he's asking for is exactly what happened. When he says, I want to Daubert him, exactly what happens at the end of My Cousin Vinny with Marissa Tomei's character. The prosecutor asks her a bunch of questions. She proves she's an expert. She doesn't have a degree in car mechanics, but she has so much experience that she has the ability to opine on these issues.
And let's also be clear too, because we talked about this a little bit with Dr. Mack, was it, who was disqualified as an expert in the Florida case. This isn't about how good you are as a doctor. It actually has to say whether your knowledge in your field is what is needed for expertise in this case. So you can have this doctor, for example, would probably not be qualified as an expert on, I don't know, breastfeeding or episiotomies, for example, right? He is qualified, but he's also a doctor, but it doesn't mean that he's qualified, even if he knows what an episiotomy is, even if he's studied that in school, but he has no experience to be able to testify as an expert on episiotomies. Does it mean so if he were disqualified as an expert to testify on episiotomies, doesn't mean he's a bad doctor. It's not saying he's not a good doctor. So it's a very legal thing. It's whether their knowledge can qualify for the expertise needed in this case. So he goes on to say that Patrick did not know that Lindsay was taking medication in nursing school. And in numerous text messages, she would tell people that she was doing well, even leading up to the day of the murders and the day of the murders. And it portrayed something that was different from what was going on inside of her. And I think we've heard this from some people, that of all the things, she might even minimize some of the suffering that she was going through. Now, her mother-in-law suggested someone named Rose to meet with Lindsay, and she did. The doctor suggested lamotrigine, and she also discussed lamotrigine with Dr. Tufts. Now, lamotrigine is approved for use for bipolar, but it is also used for epilepsy and depression as well. Ultimately, 3 different providers suggested lamotrigine for Lindsay, and Tufts was the one who wrote the prescription. Lindsay got the medication, but she decided not to take it because she was concerned about a serious rash. It's not clear if Tufts knew she didn't take the lamotrigine, also known as Lamictal. And Lindsay told the doctor that she felt like a zombie. And the McLean records demonstrate that she was not doing well, but she characterized it differently to them, which makes it harder on providers because they do depend on you telling them what's going on inside of your mind.
So she apparently told him that she was able to maintain her appearances around family. And one thing she talked about, I thought this was an interesting callback. So you remember the friend who went to visit her after the murders? It was kind of a why did they call her type thing. We didn't really know. I guess they called her for this reason. So that friend met with her and had conversations with her. Apparently, Lindsay was upset about how this went because she felt like Spalding, where she was at the time, did not treat her mental health very well, or really at all. And that this led to her being unable to interact with her friend, and it hurt her friendship. And the point the Commonwealth is trying to make is even now at this late hour, Lindsay still doesn't believe that the people treating her know what they're doing, much like she didn't before the murders. Whether it was Dr. Tufts or nurse practitioner Gelada or McLean or whoever it was. And she told him that she was upset that Spalding prioritized her spinal cord injury over her mental health treatment. Obviously, they're a rehab facility, so the primary thing they're doing is the spinal cord injury. But her medical records indicated that she did get significant mental health care there while she was there, which is inconsistent with what she's telling this doctor. Now, we get into some really interesting things that, frankly, I hadn't even thought about. So this was some cool stuff. So we go back to the 24th, and we go back to this question. Was this a plan? Was this a setup? Did she send Patrick out specifically to have enough time to commit this crime? And they ask him about the takeout order on the 24th. And he notes something that I hadn't noticed, but this is why it's good to have FBI agents who are also psychologists, that she had already searched 3V and the distance and time it would take before she sent the text to Patrick about whether or not he wanted to get takeout. And she didn't just say, do you want to get takeout? She specifically said, I want to get takeout from 3V. And she told the doctor that the reason she did this was fairly simple, because 3V was the only restaurant she could remember that they had gotten takeout from. That is not true. According to Patrick, they had never gotten takeout from 3V. Typically, when they got takeout, they got it from much closer places. 3V was a restaurant they had visited, but it was a good ways away, and so it wasn't the kind of place they would go for takeout. But on this day, the day of all days was the day that she just so happened to send him for the first time to go to 3V to pick up takeout.
This, in my mind, was a huge moment. I didn't know this. I didn't know about her searching it beforehand. I think I kind of did. But the fact that they had never gone to 3V before goes to what Dr. Kirk was saying about the planning. This, in my mind, in all these interviews were asked, what are bombshells? Few bombshells. I'm horrified. Do I need a lawyer? And then, the phone call, where do we stand with Patrick? This I would put up there with it in terms of being a bombshell of her intentional planning.
And let me just say, many of you have said, and you've pointed to Andrea Yates, that it is possible to plan while in the midst of psychosis. So even if this was an effort to get him out of the house to do this, perfectly consistent. But we have a problem here. That is not what Lindsay says. Lindsay doesn't say that she was hearing the voice when she looked up 3V. She doesn't say that she was in psychosis at this point. In fact, she says the opposite. To this day, she says she was perfectly fine then. This is a coincidence. The voice came on after Patrick left. So, if there is evidence of planning, it is evidence that what Lindsay has told us is a lie. And I think that's important. If you believe this was planned, then the story Lindsay has told you about the voice and about the psychosis isn't true. And that's why this was so important. And I don't know if it came across at 1 speed, but at 1.5, I was like, wow, that's some really powerful stuff. And then there's CVS. Now, she searched for Miralax about an hour before, and she had looked into all this stuff well before she talked to Patrick. In fact, she did not mention CVS to him or the need to pick up the medication until literally just before he left. So, even though she'd looked it up considerably before, she sets up the trip to the 3V restaurant, and then right as he's leaving, she says, oh, by the way, on your way, can you stop to pick up this medication? This obviously lengthens the trip, and it adds a stop, which means it's going to take longer for him to be able to complete this trip.
So then he says that it was a serious suicide attempt. It required sequential decision-making. She got a knife from the butcher block downstairs. She went up the stairs. She cut herself. She also took pills. And when he asked her about how many handfuls did she take, she did not say that she took handfuls of pills. In fact, she did not describe the overdose. She said that she slashed the screen and dove out the window in all of this. So the sequential decision-making, she had to go to the kitchen and she got the knife. She ascended to the bedroom. She cut her neck and her throat. She took pills. Now, what she omitted, and he asked about like handfuls because you can imagine you're just grabbing pills along your way and stuff them in your mouth. But she didn't say that she crushed the pills when she was telling him the story of what she did. And this is significant to him because the pills were crushed up in the wine tumbler, which he learned this from Patrick. She said that she took it with lemonade. But they didn't have lemonade in the house, typically, according to Patrick. So he can't remember specifically this day, but he's like, that's not something that we have. She said it had been in the wine tumbler the night before, and that this is significant to the doctor because crushing up pills is kind of a challenge without the right tools. It's laborious. It takes time, especially if time is of the essence. Now, she doesn't recall locking the door.
She said she didn't lock the door.
She said she didn't lock the door.
The door is locked.
But it was locked. That's right, because Patrick had to go find a key to unlock it.
I mean, look, what's interesting about this, and something I kept thinking, is we're almost to the point where you either think she's guilty or Patrick did it. And I don't say that with any joy in referencing that conspiracy theory. But some of the stuff Patrick says is so damning to her. And I don't think Patrick's in on it. I think Patrick's just telling the truth. Like the lemonade thing. And he points out, why is it important to have the lemonade? When you crush up these pills, what do we know about pills? People crush them up and they snort them, right? So what have people been doing for a long time to try and prevent you from doing that? They've made it such that you don't want to do it. So he notes, when you crush up these pills, they are incredibly bitter. You don't want to take this stuff. You need something like a strong drink, like a lemonade with a strong taste to it, to cover up that bitter taste. So it makes it seem like if you don't typically have lemonade in the house, that you went out and got some lemonade because you knew what you were going to do. This once again points to planning. This once again points to a planned suicide that included taking your kids with you. That points to point 2, as Dr. Kirk talked about. I mean, all these things are sort of like coming together in this. But a lot of this information we're getting from Patrick. We get the information about what she said. We get the information that the door was locked. We get the information that they didn't keep lemonade, right? A lot of this is coming from Patrick. I think that's perfectly legitimate. There are people out there who won't. But if you're someone who doesn't think that Patrick's involved, this is all really damning stuff that he's bringing in. And it's subtle. And I don't know that the jury's necessarily going to get it without a really good closing. And we haven't seen that closing. But there's some really good stuff in these witnesses that you can pull out.
So then Lindsay tells them that after she has that phone call with Patrick, she took Dawson down to her husband's office to strangle him. And when he asked her what she told him, she said she couldn't remember, which is interesting because we know that she just filed a civil complaint where she said, go to God. Then she said she brought down Cora and then Callan in that order. She said that Callan was probably in the playpen, so it was fine to have him be last. And he was, in fact, the last one to be strangled, which comports with the fact that he was the only one who they could get a heartbeat on when they found the kids. The voice did not tell Lindsay how to kill the children. And the children, which we saw in their autopsy, have a strong will to live. They were active kids. They played outside and they fought for their lives. And then that's it. We just break in the middle of his answers.
Middle of an answer.
Like the middle of his answers. Usually what you do is, counsel, we're nearing the 3 o'clock hour. It's time to go. 4 o'clock hour. It's time to go. Can you wrap it up? But he was like literally in the middle of his answers. And the judge was like, oh, let's break for the day. See you, everybody. Which is very unusual, guys.
This is so weird. And another reason I really have just come to dislike this judge. So the prosecutor asks him, why is it significant what she used to kill them? And so he's going through it. Well, these are active kids. They have a will to live. We see them on the video. They're young. They're energetic. He's clearly building up to the answer that she used the exercise bands because she knew they were going to fight back, but it was something she could control, and that's why she picked that. Then Reddington objects in the middle for no apparent reason, just because he sees how badly this is going to go. We go to sidebar, and then all of a sudden we're done for the day. And it's like, what are you doing, Your Honor? Like, on what basis are we ending court literally in the middle of his answer? And I get it. He talks slow. He might have talked for another 30 minutes. Who knows? But let him finish the answer before we go. What are we even doing? But that's this judge. And I mean, not ready for prime time, this guy. But that's where we're at. And that's how today ended. All right. We're almost there, guys. Y'all been with us through this whole thing. This has been a roller coaster, I think, for everybody. I can see the end, barring something. I'm pretty sure what I'm going to say at the end of this case. And I will tell you, my opinion on this case has changed at various times throughout it. This has been a really enlightening trial. I'll say that. And I think a lot of people have felt that way. So there's a lot of divergent opinions. We've seen a lot of divergent opinions. It's been so interesting to get your emails. We have gotten emails from people who suffered from postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis who think Lindsay Clancy is absolutely guilty. And we've gotten emails from the same kind of people who think she's absolutely not. We've gotten emails from people who work in this area of the law who think she's not guilty. People who are forensic psychologists who say she absolutely is. It's fascinating. And it's going to be so interesting to see how the jury handles this at the end of the day. Keep sending us those emails. We really appreciate them. prosecutorspod@gmail.com if you have thoughts. If you want to opine, interact with us on social media, @prosecutorspod for all your social media, X, TikTok, or Instagram. We're always on those. If you want to have conversations about this case with really smart people, go to the gallery on Facebook. They're talking about this case 24/7. You'll have a lot of fun there. If you want to see us record these episodes early, after the trial, the night of the trial, basically at this point, we're recording every night. You can join Patreon for $3 a month. If you want to get the episodes early and ad-free, Patreon for $3 a month, or Apple subscriptions. If you want to see the videos edited, you can do that on our Substack. Just Google the Prosecutors Podcast Substack, True Crime Times, and you will find it. All right, Alice. I always feel like this is so much pressure because you always say something
I was just
so
going to say,
profound.
I'm too tired to say anything tonight.
Do you have anything that you would like to add before we sign off, before the final day, we hope? If Reddington pulls out a rebuttal,
I was going to say, I don't know. I know we keep changing our estimate of the timeline. I think because of the many breaks this court takes and the refusal to go past 4 o'clock, I actually think there's a good possibility we don't get closing arguments tomorrow, that we get them on Thursday morning.
Oh, we definitely are.
Yeah.
We're not doing closings tomorrow.
Because
the judge
I don't know how...
said that at the very, very end. He said that.
I missed that because I was too shocked that he cut off the expert. Okay, well, there's that. I was just updating where I was, and because I don't know how long. I think we get closing arguments Thursday. I hope. I want to watch that lunar eclipse on Thursday, man.
If we get closing arguments on Thursday, do we get a verdict before the end of the week? What do you think?
I don't think so. I am still hopeful that we don't get a hung jury. I think if we have closing arguments on Thursday, I still think there's a possibility we have closing arguments Thursday afternoon, to be honest, because Reddington's tactics so far has been all over the place, and I don't know if he can find himself. What he should do is just finish this witness on cross and not drag it out for multiple days. But I think there's a possibility if they don't get the jury, because the jury charge is going to take a while too, especially if they have fights about this. If they don't actually go back and start deliberating until Friday, I absolutely do not think we have something before the weekend, if nothing more than the fact that this is a serious and long case that they may want to give their time to.
I don't think we get a verdict before Monday. That's my call. I think they'll start deliberating on Thursday. I think we'll get a verdict on Monday.
I am, okay, there's still so much left, including closings, which are going to be so illuminating. But I moved from thinking that this was, when this trial started, I thought this was going to be more likely than not guilty. And then I thought this was going to be a hung jury. And I thought we were going to be a hung jury for a very long time. I'm beginning to be hopeful we actually reach a conviction in this case. Famous last words, but I will say that's the journey, that the roller coaster that I've been on. I really thought it was going to be not guilty, like when the trial started, based on no evidence yet. And then pretty soon after the first couple, basically as soon as Patrick got on this, and I was like, hung jury, no one's going to be able to reach anything. This is too sad. And then when we got no answers from experts for a very long time, I was like, hung jury, hung jury, hung jury. The rebuttal witnesses have been really enlightening to me. I don't know if it's enough to move the needle for people who may have already made up their minds, but I am hopeful that it will not be a hung jury. That's where I am right now.
By the way, people, I don't know if you got big plans for the Monday holiday coming up, but Monday is not Labor Day. Labor Day is a week from Monday. So
did Monday, people think it was this?
People are mentioning that it's a holiday. It's not a holiday.
Oh, no, not this week. Next week it is.
Yeah. So
yeah, no, that I think we will. I think we will get.
We'll definitely have a verdict before Labor Day.
I do not think we get a verdict before the weekend. Now that I think about it, even if they get it on Thursday, partly because I do not think the jury will be fully charged and sent back to deliberate till Friday. And then we get juries all the time that go back on a Friday. They'll just wait through the weekend. So
I think the jury gets the case at lunchtime on Thursday. I think they'll have the second half of Thursday, which means
you have so much faith in Reddington being able to.
Because it's Massachusetts. You can only deliberate till 4 o'clock. And then they'll deliberate on Friday. And then I think we get the verdict Monday afternoon. And I do think we're going to get a verdict. I was in hung jury land for a while, but I think there'll be a verdict. And I guess we'll see.
Now we'll see.
All right, guys. Well, we will see you guys soon. No doubt. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. All right.
I'm too old for this. I'm so tired.
Yeah, we were talking about this would be like episode 15, and ordinarily that's essentially 4 months worth of episodes.
You know what this means? We're lazy.
We are lazy.
Clearly, we could have done more.
Yeah,
if we didn't have day jobs. Alice.
Yeah. Just imagine if we recorded like every night. You guys would get
I'm so
sick of
tired
us.
because we are. Because we are recording every night.
So
The thing that I forget about covering a case in real time is all the interview requests in real time as well.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's actually double, because like people may care if you're covering Adnan, but like decades later, it's not like there's news breaking every day and they need someone on TV.
Hello, and welcome to Pluto Phone. If you know the name of the movie you'd like to see, just stream it for free on Pluto TV, where all your blockbuster favorites are landing all summer long. Catch Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy.
Fantastic.
The Matrix Trilogy.
Welcome to the real world.
Mean Girls.
Shut up.
Titanic.
I'm the king of the world.
And so much more. For showtimes, press nothing. They're free 24/7.
That is so fetch.
On Pluto TV. Stream now. Pay never.